Probably take a little bit of a break here, just for maybe a week. I don't really want to lose.
The Indiana Fever's 2026 home opener could feature a packed stadium and rolling cameras, but a vacant court where the league's most prominent star should be. This scenario represents a growing reality for the WNBA as the 2026 season approaches. Following the expiration of the January deadline for a new labor agreement, internal reports suggest significant financial tension within the league. Some insiders claim that meeting new player demands could result in a $700 million loss, a figure exceeding the organization's total losses over its 30-year history. This standoff centers on a fundamental disagreement. The league cites financial instability, while players point to billion-dollar media deals as justification for increased compensation. At the heart of these negotiations is a generational talent who has signaled she will not play under a financial structure that fails to reflect her market value. The current financial model is increasingly viewed as obsolete. Despite moving more merchandise in a single summer than some franchises have in a decade, the league's top draw earns a base salary comparable to entry-level corporate roles. For 2026, the demand is not merely for a raise, but for a total restructuring of the revenue model. With a media rights deal now valued at over $2 billion, players are pushing for a 50-50 revenue split, matching the standard set by the NBA. The message to the front office is clear. Without a significant share of the revenue generated by this new era of viewership, the league risks losing the talent that secured those contracts. Beyond financial terms, player safety has become a critical point of contention. Physical play during the previous season, characterized by targeted hits and frequent injuries, has led to calls for an overhaul of officiating. Data indicates over 50 head and neck injuries were reported across the league in just 2 years. Negotiators are now demanding full-time, high-salaried professional officials to replace part-time contractors, along with a zero-tolerance policy for malicious targeting. The objective is not to soften the game, but to ensure that star players are not subjected to unsustainable physical risks. Logistical standards are also being reevaluated. Previous seasons saw high-profile players navigating public airport terminals with inadequate security, creating safety risks for both the athletes and the public. For 2026, the demand is a transition to permanent private travel and elite security details. Proponents of these changes argue that if the WNBA intends to operate as a premier professional league, it must provide the infrastructure and logistics required to protect its primary assets. The WNBA also faces direct market competition for the first time. A new organization, Project B, is scheduled to launch in late 2026 and is reportedly poaching talent with seven-figure salaries and ownership stakes. Additionally, the unrivaled league offers significant compensation for a shorter schedule. These alternatives provide players with unprecedented leverage. The league's top stars no longer require the WNBA platform to maintain their global reach or financial independence. They have the option to seek platforms that offer better terms and higher visibility. Corporate partners are already signaling their readiness for a shifting landscape. Nike has confirmed that Caitlin Clark's first signature shoe will launch in late 2026, regardless of whether the WNBA season is delayed or canceled. With a $28 million endorsement deal, Clark possesses the financial freedom to sit out a season to force structural change. For a commissioner facing the prospect of plummeting ratings and pressure from TV executives, this remains a significant threat to the league's stability. The 2026 season has become an ultimatum for the soul of the sport. The league finds itself divided between an established guard hesitant to change and a new generation of players with more leverage than any women in the history of athletics. The WNBA must now decide if it will evolve into a billion-dollar professional powerhouse or risk the absence of the players who brought the world's attention to the game. The ball is in the league's court, but if these demands are not met, that court may remain empty. The transition from a subsidized project of the NBA to an independent commercial powerhouse is not merely a matter of ticket sales, but a structural overhaul of the league's economic identity. For nearly 3 decades, the WNBA operated under a financial umbrella that prioritized stability over aggressive growth. This conservative approach resulted in the current collective bargaining agreement, which many players now view as a relic of a previous era. The decision by the Players Association to opt out of the current deal in late 2024 was the first formal step toward the 2026 deadline. This move was a calculated gamble based on the premise that the league's value had outpaced its contractual obligations. The metrics support this conclusion. During the 2024 season, viewership for the most watched games rivaled or exceeded traditional benchmarks for professional men's sports, including Major League Baseball and the NHL. The $2.2 billion media rights deal shared with the NBA and spread over 11 years represents the most significant influx of capital in the history of women's professional basketball. However, the complexity of this deal has become a point of contention. The agreement includes look-back provisions that allow for renegotiation if certain viewership and revenue benchmarks are met. Players argue that these benchmarks have already been cleared thanks to a surge in interest that the league's previous valuations failed to anticipate. The disparity between the projected revenue of the new media deal and the existing salary cap is stark. Under the current system, even the highest-paid veterans earn roughly $250,000 in base salary. In contrast, the new media rights revenue suggests a ceiling that could comfortably support million-dollar contracts for elite talent without compromising the league's solvency. This financial tension is exacerbated by the rise of alternative professional opportunities. The launch of Unrivaled, a 3-on-3 league founded by high-profile players, has introduced a new variable into the labor market. By offering ownership stakes and salaries that are competitive with or superior to WNBA benchmarks for a fraction of the time commitment, Unrivaled has effectively broken the WNBA's monopoly on domestic professional women's basketball. The emergence of Project B further complicates the landscape. This new entity is positioning itself as a direct competitor, targeting the same audience and the same sponsors. The existence of these leagues gives players like Clark a level of leverage that was previously non-existent. For the first time, a holdout or a move to a rival organization is not just a theoretical threat, but a viable career path supported by private equity and major brand endorsements. The conflict between the old guard and the new guard is as much about cultural philosophy as it is about money. Veterans who spent decades building the league in small arenas for low pay often view the sudden influx of attention and wealth with a mixture of pride and resentment. There is a prevailing sentiment among some longtime players that the new generation has not paid their dues. This generational divide manifested throughout the 2024 season in the form of physical play that frequently crossed the line into targeting. The officiating crisis is a direct result of this tension. For years, the league employed officials who worked on a part-time basis, often alternating between the WNBA and the collegiate level. This lack of professional consistency has resulted in a failure to adapt to the increased speed and physicality of the modern game. The demand for full-time officials is a demand for a higher standard of game management that recognizes the importance of protecting the league's stars from unnecessary injury. Safety concerns extend beyond the court to the logistical failures of the league's travel protocols. The 2024 season highlighted the dangers of requiring high-profile athletes to travel through public airports. Incidents involving aggressive fans and security breaches became a recurring issue, forcing the league to implement a reactive and inconsistent charter flight program. The players' demand for the gold standard in travel is a demand for the same security and privacy afforded to athletes in every other major professional league. The cost of permanent charter travel is significant, but proponents argue that the cost of a high-profile incident involving a star player would be far higher, both in terms of liability and damage to the league's reputation. The expansion of the league is another critical factor in the 2026 negotiations. With new franchises confirmed for San Francisco, Portland, and Toronto, the league is growing at its fastest rate in decades. Expansion fees, which have reached as high as $50 million for recent additions, represent a massive windfall for existing owners. Players are arguing that a portion of these fees should be integrated into the basketball-related income pool, which determines the salary cap. The addition of new teams also creates more roster spots, potentially diluting the talent pool unless the league can successfully attract and retain top international players. This growth requires a more sophisticated administrative structure, one that can manage the complexities of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise rather than a small-scale nonprofit. The influence of individual sponsorships is fundamentally changing the power dynamics of the league. In previous decades, the league office held the majority of the marketing power, controlling how players were presented to the public. Today, elite players are independent brands with their own content production teams and direct relationships with global corporations. The $28 million Nike deal signed by Clark is a prime example. This contract is not tied to her WNBA performance or participation. It is a bet on her personal brand. When a player's off-court earnings are 50 to 100 times greater than their league salary, the league loses its primary means of control. The threat of a season-long holdout becomes credible when the athlete does not rely on the league for their primary income. The 2026 season represents a deadline for the WNBA to prove it can operate as a Tier 1 professional organization. The current labor dispute is a symptom of a larger identity crisis. The league is transitioning from a period of survival to a period of massive accumulation, and the rules that govern the survival phase are no longer applicable. The demand for a 50-50 revenue split is a demand for equity, but it is also a demand for the league to adopt the same business model that turned the NBA into a global powerhouse. Critics of this move argue that the WNBA does not yet have the gate receipts or local TV deals to sustain such a split, but proponents point to the unprecedented growth in national television ratings as evidence that the value is already there. The possibility of a lockout or a strike in 2026 is a concern for networks like Disney, Amazon, and NBC, who have invested heavily in the league's future. These partners are paying for the presence of specific stars who drive viewership. A season without those stars would likely trigger clawback clauses in media contracts, potentially bankrupting the league or setting its growth back by a decade. The league's leadership is caught between the fiscal conservatism of its long-term owners and the aggressive demands of its players and new investors. The resolution of this dispute will determine the trajectory of women's professional sports for the next 20 years. The physical toll of the game and the lack of comprehensive health benefits are also on the bargaining table. Players are seeking better post-career medical coverage and improved maternity and family leave policies. As the season expands to more games, the demand for better recovery facilities and specialized medical staff becomes a necessity rather than a luxury. The current infrastructure in many WNBA markets lags far behind that of their NBA counterparts, with some teams still sharing practice facilities with local colleges or community centers. The demand for dedicated, state-of-the-art facilities is part of the larger push for professionalization. The global perspective cannot be ignored. The WNBA has long been the destination for the best players in the world, but as leagues in Europe and China increase their spending, that dominance is no longer guaranteed. If the WNBA cannot offer competitive salaries and professional conditions, it risks losing talent to international markets where the cost of living is lower and the salaries are often tax-exempt. The 2026 agreement must address the priority rule, which currently penalizes players for arriving late to training camp due to international commitments. This rule has been a major point of friction, as many players rely on international play to supplement their WNBA income. The role of the commissioner, Cathy Engelbert, is increasingly scrutinized as the deadline approaches. Tasked with balancing the interests of 12 different ownership groups with vastly different financial appetites, her ability to navigate these negotiations will define her legacy. Some owners are eager to capitalize on the league's growth by spending aggressively, while others remain wary of overextending and returning to the era of financial instability. This internal division among owners makes it more difficult for the league to present a united front in labor negotiations. The Caitlin effect has also changed the way the league is scouted and marketed at the collegiate level. The 2024 and 2025 draft classes have brought in a wave of talent that has already experienced high-level fame and commercial success before entering the professional ranks. These players are coming into the league with high expectations for how they should be treated and compensated. The college game, through name, image, and likeness or NIL deals, has ironically created a situation where some players take a pay cut to turn professional. This inversion of the traditional sports economic model is unsustainable and is a driving force behind the demand for a total teardown of the WNBA's revenue structure. The 2026 deadline is not just about a contract, it is about whether the WNBA can successfully integrate into the mainstream of the American sports economy. The league has spent 30 years as a niche product, but it is now being asked to perform on the largest stage in the world. This transition requires a level of investment in security, officiating, travel, and compensation that the current model was never designed to support. The players are aware that their window of maximum leverage is narrow. The 2026 season coincides with the height of the current viewership surge and the commencement of the new media deals. If they do not secure a favorable agreement now, they may not get another opportunity for a decade. The debate over the soul of the sport involves a choice between the status quo and a radical reimagining of what a women's professional league can be. The old guard and the league office often advocate for incremental change, fearing that moving too fast will lead to a collapse. The revolution, led by the league's youngest and most marketable stars, argues that the collapse is more likely to come from stagnation. They point to the millions of new fans who have tuned in, not out of a sense of duty, but because the product is genuinely compelling. These fans do not care about the league's 30-year history of struggle. They care about the quality of the competition and the accessibility of the stars. The financial reality of the WNBA is that it is no longer a charity case for the NBA. It is a valuable asset in a media landscape that is desperate for live sports content. The 2026 negotiations are the first time the players will bargain from a position of undeniable strength. The outcome will depend on whether the league's owners recognize that the game has changed. The Indiana Fever's 2026 home opener remains a symbolic flashpoint. It could be the beginning of a new era of prosperity, or it could be a silent reminder of a missed opportunity. The metrics, the media deals, and the fans all point toward a future of massive growth. But that growth is contingent on a labor agreement that reflects the reality of the 2026 market. The impact on the youth basketball pipeline is also a factor. Young athletes are watching the 2026 negotiations to see if professional basketball is a viable career path that offers both financial security and physical safety. If the WNBA remains a league of gas money salaries and inadequate security, the best young talent may choose to focus on individual brand building or alternative leagues rather than the traditional professional route. This would lead to a long-term decline in the quality of the WNBA product, eventually driving away the very fans the league worked so hard to attract. The intersection of sport, commerce, and labor rights in 2026 will be a landmark moment in athletic history. The demands for private travel, professional officiating, and a 50-50 revenue split are not just about comfort or greed, they are about the fundamental valuation of women's labor in the sports industry. For the first time, the people who play the game have the data, the alternative options, and the public support to demand a seat at the table on their own terms. The 2026 season is the ultimate test of the WNBA's maturity. Whether the league meets that test or retreats into the safety of the status quo will determine the fate of professional women's basketball for generations to come. As the clock ticks toward the 2026 opener, the pressure continues to mount on all sides. The sponsors are waiting, the networks are waiting, and most importantly, the fans are waiting. The league is currently in a state of high-stakes anticipation, where every statement from the league office and every social media post from a star player is parsed for clues about the future. The reality of the find-out phase is that the consequences of failure are absolute. In a competitive media environment, there are no second chances for a league that fails to deliver its best product at the height of its popularity. The 2026 season will either be remembered as the moment the WNBA truly arrived or the moment it let its greatest opportunity slip away. The expansion of the league into new markets like Golden State, Portland, and Toronto adds a layer of logistical and financial complexity to the 2026 deadline. These new franchises have paid record-breaking entry fees, some reportedly exceeding $50 million based on the projected growth of the league's media value. If the 2026 season is delayed or canceled, these owners face a catastrophic start to their investment. They are entering the league at a time when the cost of operation has skyrocketed due to the new demands for charter flights and professional-grade practice facilities. This creates a divide within the ownership group itself between the legacy owners who have weathered decades of lean years and the new investors who are eager to spend aggressively to capture the current market momentum. A significant but less discussed demand in the current labor negotiations involves player equity. The Players Association is reportedly pushing for a mechanism that allows athletes to own stakes in their franchises or the league itself. This model, which has gained traction in other professional sports, would fundamentally change the relationship between the league and its stars. Instead of being mere employees, players would become partners in the league's long-term success. Proponents argue that this is the only way to truly align the interests of the league and the athletes who drive its revenue. However, current league bylaws and NBA-related restrictions make this a difficult legal hurdle to clear, and it remains one of the most contentious points on the bargaining table. The economic impact of a potential 2026 lockout extends far beyond the arena walls. In cities like Indianapolis, the Caitlin economy has become a tangible force, driving significant revenue for local hotels, restaurants, and small businesses. A canceled season would result in millions of dollars in lost local tax revenue and thousands of lost shifts for arena staff and hospitality workers. This local economic pressure is being funneled back to the league through city governments and stadium authorities, who are demanding clarity on the 2026 schedule. The league is no longer just a sports organization, it is a primary economic driver in several mid-sized markets, and the stakes of a work stoppage are now measured in regional GDP. Legal experts are also closely monitoring the force majeure and strike clauses within the new $2.2 billion media rights deal. If the WNBA fails to deliver the minimum number of games required by its broadcast partners, the financial penalties could be severe. Unlike previous labor disputes, the league now has a fiduciary responsibility to international media conglomerates that have built their summer programming blocks around women's basketball. These networks have already begun selling advertising slots for the 2026 season at premium rates. A failure to play would trigger a cascade of legal challenges and refund demands that could permanently damage the league's credibility with future broadcast partners. The 2026 standoff is ultimately a test of whether the WNBA can successfully manage its own success. The transition from a small, centralized operation to a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar enterprise requires a level of professional maturity that the league has never before been forced to demonstrate. Every decision made in the coming months, from the structure of the revenue split to the implementation of new safety protocols, will serve as a blueprint for the future of professional women's sports globally. The margin for error has disappeared. The 2026 season will either be the year the league secures its place in the pantheon of major American sports, or the year it becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of failing to adapt to a changing market.